about the vestry in four different ways. We're going to be talking about the role of the vestry, and we're going to touch on the history and then some of the characteristics of the average Episcopal vestry in the church. We're going to then discuss key vestry responsibilities, especially related to thinking about the vestry as a leadership body that is actively discerning God's will for the congregation. We will then proceed to tools and resources for new vestry leaders. This section is oftentimes in our surveys described as the most helpful section, so I hope you stick around for that. And then lastly, we're going to have a discussion time about focused on potential next steps. So I'm going to begin by talking just a little bit about the history of uh, the vestry in the Episcopal Church, and actually beginning with the Church of England. You may be wondering why there's an image of an armoire on this slide. In the Church of England, the annual election of church wardens took place during Easter week, and it was a simple process. All adult male parishioners would crowd into the room where the clergy would robe, a room called the vestry, to hear the accounts of the past church wardens and then to elect their successors. Later in Episcopal Church history in Virginia, parishes had become so large that it was impossible to crowd all voting members into one robing room. And so they developed a practice of electing vestry members for life. So let me repeat that. They elected vestry members for life. So although maybe some might feel that they've served an entire lifetime on their vestry, thankfully that's not common practice in the Episcopal Church anymore. Also, thankfully, we've expanded our role of who can have a voice and vote. Obviously, it's not just adult male members today. And vestries are made up of women and men. And this is something that a lot of, many congregations don't know. But depending on your diocese and whether or not the diocese has made certain provisions, it's actually possible to have youth on your vestry. So if you're interested in having youth on your vestry, I would check with your diocesan office. There are certain provisions that dioceses create around how to vote or voice and vote for particular kinds of votes that allow them to participate or abstain because of liability issues, quite frankly. So check with the diocesan office about that. Today, vestries are usually elected at the annual parish meeting, which often takes place at the beginning of the calendar year. There is a range of sizes of vestry. It's fairly common for vestries to range between 6 to 12 members, depending on the size of the parish. And one practice among many small congregations is to trim the size of the vestry so as to eliminate some unnecessary bureaucracy. So again, one of the things that I hope comes through this presentation is that actually in the Episcopal Church, there's a wide range of practices and sizes and different sizes and shapes of vestries, and people are actively adapting the model to fit their needs. So whatever the sizes of the vestry in all cases, vestries do serve as the legal representatives of the body of the parish regarding all matters pertaining to its corporate property. The rector of the parish or the priest in charge or vicar is recognized as the presiding officer of the vestry. One distinction is that the former bishop of the Diocese of Texas, Bishop Claude Payne, advises clergy who are the presiding officers of vestries to consider whether or not they should train the senior warden or another trusted member of the vestry to actually facilitate regular meetings. While this person would remain the presiding officer, this allows the priest to focus on the matter at hand rather than how well the meeting is being run, to note body language, and to play much more of a active listening role. Um, so there are usually two wardens on a vestry. The senior warden leads the parish between rectors and is supposed to be a source of support to the rector. The junior warden oftentimes has special responsibility over church property and buildings. And some vestries will elect treasurer and clerk, and these officers may or may not be vestry members. So that is a very brief overview of the history and some average characteristics of common vestries today. But what do vestries do? Um, we believe that there are four primary things that vestries do. The first two are deeply related. They listen deeply and actively to where God is calling the congregation in your particular place at this particular moment in time. Um, Very connected to that is the work of over time and over many conversations, articulating a shared sense of mission and vision, a shared sense of purpose for the wider congregation and with the wider congregation. Canonically, the vestry plays a very important role in identifying new leaders for the congregation and wider church, and I'll go into that in just a moment. And then I think oftentimes this is thought of as the classic responsibility of the vestry in that they're the stewards of resources. They are managers of resources and finances of the congregation.
So, the role of the vestry. There are canons that outline what the role of the vestry is, but for those of you who are new to this or unfamiliar with this, what are church canons? Canons are basically church laws. There are national canons, which are the ones that are posted up here on this slide. There are diocesan canons, and a further similar type of church law is parish bylaws. One of the handier ways to think of this is the equivalent of national laws, state laws, or sort of like community, county, or city laws, sort of that similar structure. And likewise, in this sort of structure, um, parishes need to abide by their diocesan canons, and diocesan canons need to abide by national church-wide canons. So what do the overarching canons for all of us say about the role of the vestry? The first two are that they shall be the agents and legal representatives of the parish in all matters concerning corporate properties and the relations of the parish to its clergy, that they should ensure that standard business methods will be observed. Broadly speaking, these relate to making sure that the congregation is being good stewards to their property and finances. The second two, when the parish is without a rector, the officers of the vestry are responsible for the continuation of worship, including the calling of the rector, and the vestry has responsibility for nominating the persons for holy orders, are somewhat interesting, are relating to this role of identifying religious leadership. And to note that vestries do play a particularly important role during times of clergy transition and in nominating people for holy orders. But a vestry today is typically going to be facing and dealing with a lot more. Today's vestry is faced with discerning their vision amidst many changes. This slide has some of the things we at ECF have come to see as particularly important for vestries to be aware of. To give you some context of where we are as a church as a whole, in the most recent data available, domestically there are 6,667 congregations in the Episcopal Church. Only 68% of those congregations, or rather 68% of those congregations have an average Sunday attendance of 100 or less. So over two-thirds of congregations have less than 100 people gathered on a Sunday morning, with the average being 65 people. 4%, a very small portion of all these congregations out there have an attendance of 300 people or more. So what we find often is that a lot of people feel like they're over such a small community or such a tiny community. In the Episcopal Church, it's actually it's a much more I guess size that most people can relate to. That oftentimes most congregations are closer to what would be quote unquote average, and are really smaller congregations are much more of a norm in the Episcopal Church. And likewise, roughly one-third of all the congregations in the domestic church have one part-time or non-stipendary priest, with a further 11% that don't have a priest at all, using supply clergy and lay leaders to assist with worship and pastoral care. Um, Many of our congregations have buildings that are outdated for what their congregations are today, frequently with deferred maintenance. Some congregations have been finding new uses for their facilities, giving new life to their buildings. Others have been taking other roads and giving them up entirely. I encourage you to check out ECF Auto Practices for some wonderful, inspiring stories about congregations that have been doing this. Um, we no longer really live in a homogenous, primarily Christian culture, as the data is, much data has shown. We now live in a very pluralistic society with increased diversity in race and religion. This is reflected in the fluidity of people's choices of faith, people changing their faith, and with a rise in those not affiliating at all, what are typically called the nuns. Latinos are the fastest part of growing demographic in American culture and society, and likewise within the Episcopal Church. And Asian American communities are also a very fast-growing demographic within the Episcopal Church and wider U.S. as well. And with that, we also have an increase in many multicultural congregations, more closely reflecting the people that are in congregations surrounding communities. So as leaders in your congregation and in your community, I'd encourage you to take a look around at the people in your pews on a Sunday morning that are gathered throughout the week, and then also take a look in your surrounding neighborhood and in your wider community and just ask yourself, what's out there? Who's out there? Um, the role of today's vestry faces some common challenges that are also out there. We at ECF, with ECF Auto Practices, we send out a survey to a random sampling of 150 registered users every other month with the same set of questions. And over the years, we've collected a wonderful amount of data. To date, we've received over 800 responses. Through this, we've been able to find out sort of the top common challenges that Episcopal congregations are facing out there. As you can see bulleted out, that change is definitely right up at the top for a lot of congregations, and being able to implement change, or there's a lack of ability to do that. Communications, as we know that social media has really turned the tables in terms of what it means to have effective communication. Stewardship, of course, with the changes in finances, there are big differences in generational giving that we see in terms of, say, millennials versus baby boomers in terms of the types of engagement. Again, if this is an area that you're struggling with, or in any of these areas, to check out the resources available on ECF Auto Practices. We have here with Vestry Leadership, with the roles and processes for vestry meetings, how to be an effective vestry, and with that, vision and planning. So this is just to kind of give you a sense of sort of like what we're seeing out there and what people are commonly identifying and struggling with as well.
Thank you. So Brendan just described some key roles of the vestry in the midst of challenges today, and I'm going to continue by talking about the 4 key responsibilities we laid out a little bit earlier. The first being discerning God's mission and vision for the congregation, which means as a vestry, continuing to engage the question of why. Um, what is it that we're doing? Why are we doing it? And many vestries engage these questions through by beginning the vestry agenda, or beginning each vestry agenda through spiritual practices, getting prayer and Bible study on the regular meeting agenda, and creating a time and opportunity for deeper reflection about where God is calling the community. One congregation, St. Matthew's, in, I believe, goodness, St. Minnesota, restructured their agenda and their vestry in a really interesting way, so that it prioritized this discernment, ongoing discernment of mission and vision. They are a medium-sized congregation, so it, bear that in mind. What they created was an operational committee, which they were then able to delegate a lot of the ongoing kind of operational work of building maintenance, as well as budgeting, and really, therefore, let the vestry focus on doing ongoing discernment, strategic planning projects. So that's one way in which to restructure a vestry to prioritize discernment of mission and vision. Um, and the second piece has to do with defining what we mean by those words in the first place. ECF defines mission as that which God is calling us to do, and vision as what the church and world looks like once our mission has been fully realized. And Duncan, yes, we do offer some training in how to discern mission and vision, and how those two aspects can not create a strategic plan, but really become a way of evaluating opportunities. So, for instance, asking yourself, does this actually fit into our sense of identity as well as mission and vision? And we can provide some information about that a little bit later. Another key responsibility is to be good stewards of property and resources and creating a financially vital congregation. Um, Certainly, according to the canons, the canons literally say the vestry shall be agents and legal representatives of the parish in all matters concerning its corporate properties and the relations of the parish to its clergy. And secondly, that it shall ensure the standard business methods will be observed. Um, so in terms of fiduciary responsibilities, this includes ensuring proper asset and financial management and oversight, um, and salary and benefits for clergy and lay staff. And this is frequently carried out through diversification of income sources. One point that I think is really important for congregations, or I think has been really key, is that most, I think most Episcopal congregations are realizing that their annual stewardship drives are no longer sufficient for funding the entire operational budget of their congregation. There are a wide variety of reasons for that. Um, uh, and so one of the things that many congregations are having to think about, if they haven't already done so, is how can they use their buildings and property, as well as other assets, for other types of income stream, to supplement the annual budget. This is also carried out through periodic capital campaigns, and capital campaigns can be used for everything from building maintenance or expansion, as well as to alleviation of debt. I have also heard of one church in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Southside Abbey, which has used the capital campaign to raise funds to do wonderful work in the neighborhood. So actually, capital campaigns can be turned in a lot of different directions. So we encourage some creativity in that direction. and for setting some sound endowment policies and developing a planned giving campaign. Um, the question of liability, this is a tough topic, but it is something that vestries should be aware of. Um, Vestries and parishes can be held liable for a variety of things: accidents occurring on the parish property, violation of fiduciary responsibilities, a violation of contracts, wrongful termination, and other employment practices, discrimination and sexual harassment and misconduct. Oftentimes, so it's important for vestries to be in touch with your diocese, because diocese will oftentimes be able to direct you to directors' liability insurance or officers' insurance coverage, and this is something that really need to be in touch. Congregations need to be in touch with their diocese about uh, for the health of your congregation.
So another key aspect of vestry leadership is in identifying new leadership. As we talked about earlier, one of the canonical responsibilities is for identifying the new rector for a congregation, and also dealing with any persons in the congregation that are interested in holy orders. But in a broader sense, and we at ESF very much feel that effective vestries are a critical role in identifying and cultivating new leadership, both within the vestry, for the vestry, and also within the wider context of the various ministries taking place in the congregation. Um, this also plays out in the vestry nomination and election process. As we've pointed out again, and I'll stress here as well, that there are a wide variety of ways that congregations do this. There is not one set way of being able to do the nomination and election process. Um, in the recent past, and there's been a greater focus on the discernment aspect, and in doing a much more extended discernment process for selecting new vestry members. There are some wonderful articles on ECF Bible Practices about this that have carried out in many interesting ways. For smaller congregations, for example, in Eastern Oregon, diocesan canons were actually changed to allow for all church vestries, given the sizes of the congregation, and that was a shift in the way that they did their vestry meetings, and then hence since they were struggling so much with just coming up with the number of bodies to meet the minimum requirements, to a recent article that was just in the January issue of Vestry Papers, and a congregation that redeveloped into a very extensive and wonderful discernment process for those in their congregational life that were interested in leadership and roles in the congregation, so that they actually do a selection and not a voting process at their annual meeting. Churches can also learn from community organizing, and we, as we like to point out, that being proactive about identifying new leaders. One of the good mantras in community organizing is that if you want something done, to ask a busy person, but also to take some of the examples in some wonderful, effective grassroots organizing. This fits very well into the model of being a local congregation involved in a particular context, with having one-on-one meetings and being able to have and build up a docket of people that are going to be able to turn to for a variety of things. You may be looking to partner with somebody in a neighboring congregation or in your community. Are you in touch with the leaders in your local government or in your local business community? These are folks that you may not necessarily be seeking out to do something with immediately, but being able to establish those relationships and being able to turn to those folks when you say, hey, we got this upcoming event. I know that you're interested in X, Y, and Z. Would you be willing to partner with us on that? And then likewise within your congregation, really being able to get to know the folks that are in your congregation and what their gifts and their talents and their interests are. I always like to share that one of my colleagues here at ECF has a professional background that's very much in finance, um, but one of her real passions is for social work and prison ministry. And initially her congregation really missed that and kept trying to put her onto the finance committee and put her into forming the budget, which was just really missing the mark. And only if they really had known that her real thing was really for Crescio and for taking part of those ministries. So encourage you to really take that to heart. Um, Another part is, of course, part of your meetings and meeting effectively. This is a big part of what vestries do. Um, I'll just briefly go over this list. Of course, you'll have the copy of the slides, but want to emphasize a couple of things. Covenants and norms, especially if you've had your vestry election recently, take some time to draw up the covenant or establish some norms so that you can effectively work as a group. Often this takes place in the context of a retreat. One of our bloggers, Rochelle Thompson, has a wonderful phrase of that to retreat is to take a retreat to move forward. That you really need some time to be able to form spiritually together, to get to as much as you may know all the other folks that from in your congregation who are part of the vestry, that you are a team together in this particular point in time, and that you need to come together and to be able to begin working on the bigger parts of discerning what it is that you're being called to do in your community. And then another thing I just point out as well is that Miguel pointed out about options for having somebody presiding, to also consider somebody who's also functioning the role of a chaplain, that a person can be more attentive to the spiritual concerns of the vestry, and that can be in a rotating basis. In some cases, this could be somebody on a month, each month switches up and is looking for in some sort of spiritual practice, leading worship, just to be able to consider that as an aspect to enrich your vestry meetings.
Great, thank you. And Brendan, while you were presenting, I also added a few resources in the chat box just to supplement what you're saying. So the last link is an example of a vestry covenant from St. Andrew's Church in Ayer, Massachusetts. Their 2007 covenant, and it lays out their how they will support one another, how they will kind of their public role within the congregation as well. So a variety of resources. So we invite your questions and comments. And as in the case of any sort of question, we do have a lot of also expertise in the room of those who are participating. So if folks want to chime in response to any question at any time, please feel free to jump in. So thank you, Inez. I will continue. I will try to speak up a little bit louder. Questions or comments?
Well, we'll have some time later to also have some questions and comments, but if you come up with something at this while we're moving on, please feel free to go ahead and type that into the chat box as well. But I guess we'll go ahead and move ahead. And looking at tools and resources for vestry. So I really encourage you to build your toolbox, so to speak. Hopefully you already have some sort of guide to being on the vestry of your congregation, a job description perhaps for the role of a vestry member. If not, just Google that as well, along with norms and covenants. There are many vestries that post that to their website as well. We have a couple examples as well posted on ECF Bible Practices for you to take a look at. Um, and also encourage you to look at getting, of course, in touch with your diocese about whether or not you need to, if you don't have a copy of the diocesan canons, um, your bylaws for the parish. Do you have those? Have they been updated recently? Do they need to be updated? And also look at some of the more community aspects. There's much that can be learned as well, especially for newer members, in getting a sense of where the congregation's been, where it's come along the way, and how it's arrived to where it is now, particularly when getting into some of those sort of in the weeds tough things. Having that perspective can be really, really helpful for folks. Of course, those things that are in your spiritual practices and for your docket for that, with the Book of Common Prayer, Holy Women, Holy Men, any of some wonderful things out there to that. But last and certainly not least, though, the Bible. And if I can drill one thing in this evening, would be, especially as a congregational leader, that reading the Bible is not an option. That we absolutely, absolutely, absolutely need to be reading the Bible regularly, frequently, all the time, wherever and whenever you can fit it in. This includes, of course, your vestry meetings, but also for any various committee meetings. I particularly would cite examples of when you're meeting to form the budget, to incorporate some prayer and Bible study in something like that as well. Buildings and grounds, some of these areas that often we want to just get around to business, but take some time to ground it spiritually. Just want to also cite that the Vestry Resource Guide, that's available through Forward Movement and in many other Episcopal booksellers. This is sort of the one-stop shop for all things vestry. It includes sort of hashes out a lot of the content that was also described this evening, in addition to a lot more detail into certain subject areas that we were only able to touch on lightly. Also includes some questions and Bible studies for vestries to be able to use as well in your meetings. ECF Auto Practices, which we have cited frequently, and have also provided some web links to. Thank you, Julie, for the shout out on the Vestry Resource Guide. I highly encourage everybody who doesn't already subscribe to ECF Auto Practices to go to ecfep.org and click subscribe in the upper right-hand corner. And that, by doing so, you will be able to get vestry papers in our mid-month digest, with useful topical resources and tools every single month in your inbox, and also gives you the ability to submit your own fabulous resources. We love to be able to, again, gather the wisdom that's in the room and that's out there already in the Your Turn section of our site. So check that out as well, and if you've got some great stuff out there, we, again, want to be able to share that widely with others.
Okay. Another great resource, which is available from the Episcopal Church, the Church Center, is the Manual for Church Business Methods, which covers all the essentials for church financial and record keeping. And it's available in both English and Spanish on that very same page. It's a very helpful tool, especially for treasurers, but also for the person in your congregation who is doing the regular role in parochial reports and record
And I
keeping.
just noted as well that if you're one of the useful tools in there, if you're not doing finances, is also in the back. They also have a guide for document record keeping, and lists the recommendations for how long you need to keep various documents in your files and records. So that's a really handy little tool that's in the back of that the Manual of Business of Church Affairs.
Great. Another wonderful resource from the Church Center is the Office of Research in general, But they provide free parish reports and community profiles for every congregation in the Episcopal Church. So this includes your average Sunday attendance and plate and pledge for the past 10 years, and a community profile of demographic insights, including population, age, and household statistics and trends. Earlier, Brendan mentioned that there are statistics which suggest uh, you know, that the Latino and Asian American populations are among the fastest growing segments of the Episcopal Church. Certainly that depends on which area of the country you are in. So having a tool like this is a really, really wonderful way of drilling into, the statistics around your particular congregation. So with that, we would like to have a conversation um, with folks about potential next steps. Um, don't I think instead of reading through this list, what I'd like to do is just open it up to those who are present. If you have a question um, or comment about, how do we take some of these ideas and actually start to integrate it into the practice of being a vestry and Episcopal congregation in your congregation. We have a few suggestions and also a cartoon about what might happen if when we invite a different perspective into the vestry and how that can lead to some great conversations. So questions or comments?
Looks like got quite a few people typing, so we'll just wait a little bit. Oh, Gwen, that's outlined in the manual sort of guide for church business affairs. There's for different types of documents, there's different suggested time periods for which you need to keep or can discard various types of documents. So download that document and refer to that section. That'll give you all that information. Sure thing.
Wonderful.
Wow.
And Julie mentions that the order of the vestry agenda is changed every month, so that every element of vestry responsibilities uh, throughout the year. Wonderful.
Duncan, I would say that really depends upon your particular congregation. That's not something that there's any one best for everybody. One size does not fit all in the Episcopal Church. So I would look to examples of congregations in your diocese, in your region, that may have a similar size and budget, and get a sense of if that's their vestry size is working well for them. Um, Generally speaking, vestries are between 6 and 12 members, and again, that tends to depend upon the size and makeup of the congregation.
Um, one of the uh, at the very beginning, I talked about just the fact that there are many different kinds of vestries. In some parts of the church, I think it is in Eastern Oregon, um, the, they had to work with the diocese to be allowed to do this, but they have moved to the all-church vestry in very small, very, very small congregations. And what that means is that uh, the entire church serves as the vestry and makes its key decisions at the annual meeting. And so that's one model in which a very, very, very small, some very small congregations in rural areas have kind of adapted the vestry model to serve their needs. Um, Again, I think that's something that you would want to check in with your diocese about. I will say, though, I think many, some vestries, uh, again, in smaller congregations, like let's say a congregation has an average Sunday attendance of 35 people, a 12-person vestry in a congregation of 35 people may be unsustainable and probably oftentimes feels pretty unsustainable. So one of the nicest things is to know that you can actually reduce that number and make really make the structure serve mission. Brendan, would you like to go ahead with the
Talking
question?
on mute. Sorry. Sorry, I was talking on mute. I realized I muted myself. So Mark asks that should nominations for the vestry come from the floor? Mark, that's something that you're going to have to check back to the canons in your diocese and endure your state nonprofit rules. Although that should be reflected in the diocesan canons as far as what's allowed for that procedure in terms of how members of your vestry can be elected. Uh, and then that would be something that the vestry would need to discern as far as whether or not that seems like a practical thing and whether or not, if that is allowed, whether or not you'd want to have that provision. And you could set that in your bylaws. Um, but our general recommendation would be to that uh, having the ability to have an extended discernment process in the congregations that we've seen with really healthy vestries has really been beneficial when it's come to the election process.
Duncan asked a question about creating more time for visioning and planning in vestry meetings. And there are several ways to address this. I think one of the most efficient is to move toward a consent agenda model. And I've included a link to an article which outlines how you can do that. Um, uh, a consent agenda is one in which essentially reports are sent and read beforehand and kind of lumped into one sum and then voted yes or no or consent or not unless people do have an objection. So it's a way of taking a lot of information and dealing with it in advance of the meeting so that the majority of the meeting then can be focused on some of these really, I mean, when we're talking about mission and vision questions, we're also talking about strategic questions. So kind of can the meeting, the monthly meeting of vestries be focused on big picture strategic questions, discerning God's will in relationship to these big picture questions?
And Betsy asks, what is the usual practice for sharing financial statements with the congregation? Again, that does vary, but I would say that that's something you need to take into account of what's needed and what's healthy. I would always say when it comes to matters of finances to be as transparent as possible, that without having to, I guess, reveal all the horrific, tons of details that you're just going to overwhelm people with too much information. But that if there is a lack of trust when it comes to the finances, if people are feeling anxiety around those sort of finances, that's something that should clue your congregation into needing to think about ways to more effectively communicate the finances in ways that people will feel that they are clued in and feel all right about that. And this comes also as well with vestry minutes as well. But keeping in mind that with Vestry minutes that there may be things that need to be confidential, that do need to be kept within the executive committee of the vestry, and that does not necessarily need to be posted and shared with the wider congregation, at least at that moment in time.
Um, one one resource that I want to point out is a webinar, and it's recorded. I'm putting it in the chat box, called "The Basics of Parish Finance," and this is pretty consistently rated as one of our best webinars, and it's just basically outlines um, what a congregation needs to know and how it can think about everything from the budget to its overall financial health and to some reporting mechanisms. So this would be something that would be great. The recording would be something that would be great to watch potentially with finance committee members or the treasurer as well. Really helpful resource led by Jerry Kuchar, who's a ECF consultant, the author of several books on this issue, and Jim Murphy, who is the managing program director here at ECF for financial resources. Well, I have a question for those who are participating, and I want to go back to Duncan's question because it's oftentimes something that many congregations face. Um, how does your vestry uh, how does your vestry in its monthly meetings engage in discerning God's call or God's mission for your community? I would love to hear how, whether through Bible study or through retreats, I think it would be wonderful uh, to just name some of those ways in the chat box for everyone to read.
Quite all right. Happens all the time, especially when you got a funny spelling like mine. Um, but I guess there were things that you found particularly helpful. I guess any challenges that you still feel like you're going to be facing. Please, or any other questions, we're happy to hang around a little bit just for a couple minutes still afterwards as well with this. But we'll also invite you to send us an email. Duncan, of course, please send us an email, and we'll definitely get you that link. But if you have any other questions as well, we invite you to be in touch with us. You can see Miguel's information at the top. Nancy Davich is the editor of ECF Auto Practices as well, and myself. We are all happy to be in touch. I am particularly interested as well in knowing what you thought of this evening's webinar, and we very much take all this into account when we are planning the next iteration of the Vestry Orientation webinar, and as well for all of our other offerings, as well as there's a subject or something that you're grappling with and need help with, let us know, and so that we can be able to develop the tools and resources to equip you in your ministry, in your congregation. And with that, there's going to be an email in your inbox that's with a link to the survey. So please take a moment to fill that out. We really value and highly appreciate your information and feedback as far as of what you thought. But with that, thank you all for coming out this evening and taking very much precious, and we are so glad that you came to join us and to spend some time learning about Vestry leadership. And we wish you all the best. God bless and Godspeed in your ministry, in your church. Have a good evening.
Evening. Bye, everyone.